if you understood, because the underdogs to her path to power.
Hi, and welcome to Her Path to Power. I'm your host, Avni Bansal, and today we have with us someone who perfectly fits the description of his path to power. We have with us Dan Corder, who's a broadcaster, he's a content creator, and he's famous for his show, The Dan Corder Show. But most importantly, he's a political satirist, and therefore his journey is very unique. He moved on from talking on radio to now doing his own shows. Dan, thank you so much for being with us here today.
Welcome to my city. Welcome to my country. It's lovely to have you here in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Thank you so much. Can I just confess, I'm really nervous. And the reason is, I've been constantly thinking, what if you crack jokes I don't understand?
Oh, well, like nearly all the jokes I crack are only for me.
Okay.
I don't care. Like you
Okay.
will notice I will tell some jokes that are for you to laugh at, but at least 1 in 5 jokes, and I do this on the TV show and the podcast also. I don't care if any of you laughs. If I think it's funny, I'm going to laugh, and that's all it is.
And it's all right if I don't get them.
Oh, please. In fact, please don't laugh at anything you don't find is funny,
Mm.
because you may discover later that you're being cancelled for laughing at something that you pretended to find funny that you didn't get. You got to be careful.
Right. But Dan, I have to tell you this. I was interviewing for the head girlship of my school.
Okay.
And my principal calls me in. And I was preparing all night for my interview, thinking, what is he going to ask?
Mhm.
And then I walk in, and there is like a few seconds of silence. And then he says, what do you do for fun? And I took a few seconds. And then I said, well, I love spending time with nature and having deep conversations. But that question has traumatized me because I don't think I am funny.
Oh,
And I think because I'm in politics, I am serious and proudly so.
mhm.
But I recognize that I don't get humor and satire. Do you think I'm the only one in politics who feels like this?
No, I think a lot of politicians, in fact, I think everyone knows the power of humor to convince, to befriend, to make people just genuinely like you and think that you're like a good hang, right? So like you're just fun to be around. And those are the kind of the people who you want to be your friends and to vote for. And I think we have seen around the world when a politician is really funny. I mean, some of the politicians in our country should have been stand-up comedians. They would have been way better stand-ups than politicians. It would have been better for the country if they'd done that instead. Of course, we have some stand-up comedians who I wish were politicians,
Mhm.
like Trevor Noah and the rest of them.
Mm.
But I think that humor is so powerful. But you know what I find is that most of the best stand-up comedians even are incredibly serious people.
Mm.
So we love making people laugh. We enjoy using humor, but I'm maybe 80% an incredibly serious person who's kept up at night by the dark and shadowy, scary things of the world.
Mm.
And then I have to laugh at it. And fortunately or unfortunately, South Africa might be the funniest country on earth. Not as in the country is funny, but as in we are funny.
Why do you say that?
Because we know how to laugh at really bad stuff as a coping mechanism.
Okay, give me
Yeah.
an example.
An example.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so South Africa recently had a 15 years long electricity crisis.
Mhm.
It was called load shedding. And there was a time where we were checking the load shedding app like it was the weather. And we were really happy if it was only 2 hours a day power off rather than 8 or 9 or 10.
Mhm.
And then South Africans started laughing about the fact that if you were going to go on dates with people and consider getting into a relationship, you'd better date someone who's on a different grid to you
Ah,
so that there's always power for one of you.
okay. Can I try and match that joke? Like,
Yes.
can I try? This is my first time doing this on camera, so
Do
it could be really bad.
Do it.
All right, but so in India, there is a claim. Bihar is a state in India, and we just had elections. And one of the claims of the ruling dispensation, which has been in power for many years, was that Bihar is 100% electrified. Right?
Okay.
So they were making these claims. But the truth is that it's just villages, not households, which means in every village, there would be one house which has electricity.
Technically, power is.
And that is 100% electrified.
That feels like the LinkedIn approach to buffing up your CV.
Mhm.
It's like technically, if you read the fine print, but nobody reads the T's and C's
Right.
really. That's crazy. Sounds like something that would happen in South Africa for sure. Like for sure, for sure. We had a story of a small village in South Africa that finally got running water, flowing water to the village for the first time. And everyone was celebrating that. And the government was like, yeah, we've brought water to this town. And then only to discover that the reason why there was water in the town was that someone in the town had been in a terrible car accident. And the road accident fund had given him a payout of a lot of money to cover his medical bills for the rest of the life. And he had used that money to build piped water systems into his town. So yes, his town did get water, but only because he was in a terrible car crash, and then used the resources that he had to provide water in a town where the government had not done so. And then the government was like, we did this.
And did that story ever come out? Like,
yes, it
on the
did.
other side?
I talked about it for months. A very, very long time.
So I want to ask, you started being on radio, and then from the national radio, you chose this medium and you started creating content, and now you're a broadcaster. So how did you choose political satire as a medium, and what's the politics behind it?
So I have always been completely obsessed with the news, completely obsessed with politics, and completely obsessed with political comedy broadly. And so I've spent 15 or longer years of my life watching Jon Stewart and John Oliver and Trevor Noah when he was on The Daily Show, and Stephen Colbert. All of these icons, right, to do phenomenal work using humor to portray really important information. And my dream was always to do something like that. But I knew that if I were to go to another country, Trevor Noah is a once in 100 years kind of person, not just from South Africa, but anywhere else in the world, to get an American audience to listen to or watch him. So I knew that wasn't going to be my path or maybe anybody else's path again. And South Africa is so perfectly suited for that because we have so much to talk about here, so much drama, so much scarcely believable nonsense. And we're so funny and we love to laugh as a people. We find joy in the darkest corners. And so when I was on the radio, I was enjoying the radio, but I was like, I wish that our media scene, our news media scene was interested in funding kinds of projects like late night shows, and they weren't. Because we have a legacy media of much older people who only know TikTok through their children, even if their children are like 30. And so I just thought to myself, I'm just going to go on TikTok and I'm going to start talking about the news and politics that I'm obsessed with anyway. But with my style, which is to laugh and to think and to be passionate and to be upset sometimes and to be fully human. And that creates an empathic relationship with an audience because they can see that I really care, I'm obsessed, think about it, and that I also make them laugh.
But would you say that what you're venturing into is still new media?
Yes.
And therefore, have you felt or experienced online hatred for what you do, which is maybe in many ways different from what one would experience if they're in traditional media? So how is this space of online media and this kind of new age media dealing with a lot of times online hatred? And I'm assuming that would come more your way because you're doing political content.
Totally. So there are a lot of agendas, there are a lot of bot networks, there are a lot of politicians, there are a lot of angry people funded secretly by the Americans and the Chinese and the Russians and all over the place. And that will come out eventually. But there are a lot of agendas and interests because what I work on is helping South Africans understand South Africa. And there are a lot of people with perverse interests to shape how South Africa is perceived, to mislead South Africans into believing something that is not the case in order to advance a political, business, economic agenda a lot of the time. What's interesting, though, is I think South Africans, because we're all part of a global kind of Western English-speaking kind of content world online, South Africans recognize what I was doing immediately. It's just that it was a South African doing it. But whenever you do online content, the love is much more intense and the hatred is much more intense because it has comment sections and people build communities where you go and talk about the things that are being discussed in video. When I was on the radio, someone would have to tweet what I said, hope that other people were also listening to that, and then they'd talk about it. On TV, a lot of the time, if it's only on TV and not uploaded, it's a passing moment. But when it's on the internet, it's pretty much
It's forever.
It's there forever. And so people go there to fight and to talk. And I don't know if you know this, but South Africa last year was measured as being we're the most internet addicted country on earth.
Oh, wow.
Average South African spends 6 hours a day online.
I would vote for India. I would just think it's us.
No, it's us. Hate to say it. Some of your 1.45 billion people are not spending a lot of time on their phones.
What are we doing?
We only have 63 million. We can focus as a country. We can be like, we're going to win this. But I call 6 hours a day online rookie numbers. Like I'm on there 8, 9, 12 hours a day. And so, yeah, I've got a hyper experienced understanding of what it's like to be a public figure in this age online in the digital world. What's great though is, I've been doing this for 10 or 11 years. I've got such a thick skin. It's just a job most of the time. I don't read the comments. And also, usually the people in the comments who are hateful are the most vile people you can imagine and are not representative of a genuine, common response to your work.
So, do you see that women in the same space would get more hatred for the
Yes.
kind of work if they were women?
Yes.
And at the same time, when you're doing your content, is there like a thin line between sexism and satire? Like, so in India, there was a stand-up comedian who got a lot of, brunt from the government.
I saw that.
Right, you did. And it's not just one, now there are many of them. So when you do political satire or you do humor as a stand up comedian, and if you start questioning the government, then suddenly, it's problematic. So where do you draw that line? So, how is humor being perceived here in South Africa generally?
Yeah.
And on this question of sexism
Mhm.
and satire, have you had an experience where you said, the lines are blurry, or you knew clearly that this is where the lines are drawn?
Okay, so my mentality about comedy is that you always punch up.
Hmm.
So if you're punching down, whether it's on a woman or a queer person or an impoverished person or a vulnerable person, you're immediately doing it wrong and you're transgressing in a way that I don't enjoy as a comedian at all. You always have to be punching up, which means you're always punching up at power. Now, if the people who are powerful are women, you don't then take a sexist trope to punch up at them. You never do that. It's not like their transgressions has got nothing to do with their woman or manhood. And it's a cheap and silly. And honestly, what's funny is when I think about the comedians who like do sexist comedy, I'm like, you realize that you're limiting your career, right? You are alienating a swathe of your audience. You don't have
Well,
to
half of them.
yeah, you don't have to make that joke. And when people say, oh, women don't enjoy stand-up comedy, women enjoy stand-up comedy that doesn't denigrate them for being women. Like, it's so obvious. So that's the first thing. The second thing about like what is too far in any context. So what's cool about South Africa is that we've got phenomenal media freedom and phenomenal freedom of expression, and largely better than I was just in Europe, and like there are a bunch of European countries where it's dangerous to mock the government. But in South Africa, for now, and we're very, very fortunate, you will get away with it and there will not be direct consequences.
Is it the law? Is it the culture? Is it a combination?
It's both. It's both. I think that we don't have an authoritarian streak in our politics yet, and I hope it remains that way, which is very beautiful. I mean, I don't know if you've been told this, but the whole country calls our president Cupcake.
I didn't know that.
For reasons that I will not go into on camera.
Okay.
But it's so commonplace now that if President Ramaphosa walks through a crowd of people, someone will in the video be like, "Hi, Cupcake," and he'll turn and he'll smile. Just a few weeks ago, a small young girl from a school was addressing like a big gathering and the president was there. And this little 9-year-old girl goes, "This was my first time ever seeing the president. Hello, Cupcake." And everyone laughed. And then the president came up afterwards and he joked about the joke, which is very beautiful. So broadly, although there are always underhanded ways to try and undercut people, there have been political parties who have tried to get me silenced or my TV show canceled or whatever. As far as state authoritarianism, it's not the case, which is phenomenal, and we're very, very, very lucky. And then to the third thing you were asking about, absolutely, rampant, awful sexism is leveled at people like me who are women doing similar work to me. All the time. There are phenomenal creators. Two of my favorites, black women, Amatle Jack, also known as Jack Amatle, and Zetu Kola. They're phenomenal. And they do very similar work to me. We've obviously got our different stuff. I'm more on the comedy laughing part than they are. But they get a sense of sexist brutalization in the comments that I obviously don't get. And there are many intersections of privilege that I have: able-bodied, tall, well-educated, white, male, straight, which saves me from a lot of brutalization on bigoted tropes.
I was going to ask this, that do you think you're better shielded because you are a white South African? And then what are the layers of intersectionality, right? So would it be the same for everybody else in South Africa doing a similar thing? And I also want to draw in the fact that when we talk about patriarchy or sexism, it doesn't just hurt the women, right? So I'm sure there's some coming your way. Maybe the way you're dealing with is different, right?
Yeah.
So what's been your experience like?
So I am interesting because I broadly have a progressive, I think, leftist, sensible politic. And that is broadly shared by most Black South Africans and South Africans of color,
Mm.
and broadly rejected by most white South Africans. And so I think the fact that the vast majority of South Africans broadly agree with my positions gives me license to do stuff. And also, it's just the novelty factor, right? It's like there's this one white boy. He's not like the
He's
others.
speaking our language.
We will listen. We will give him more grace.
Mm.
The only thing that is an interesting dynamic in South Africa is because of our horrific, deeply evil history that is also recent history with colonialism and apartheid, and not just the Afrikaners, but the British, waves and waves of brutal conquering colonial oppression that formed the legal bedrock of exploitation, capitalist exploitation, that set up apartheid to be even more effective than that, but was a part of apartheid's enabling by the British. Because of that, we rightly are extremely intolerant as a culture of racism. And so I have to be extremely attentive to the way that I take up space and the way that I talk about stuff, because rightfully people see a white privileged man and they go, we're going to listen carefully to what you say, because you might be closeted racist or have bigoted racist beliefs, because let's be honest, most of you white South Africans do. And so that's the thing where I get extra policed. But frankly, tiny price to pay for the work that I do.
But I'm sure while being on camera all the time, you're doing shows like every day, you've never had to worry about how am I looking today, or like what am I wearing? And even just like before sitting for this interview, I was thinking, is the color all right?
Yeah.
Now, it's a very simple thing, but in the 21st century, the fact that women who are on camera
Of course.
have to be so worried about how they're looking, because all the time, and this is true for women in politics, this is true for women in media, this is true for women in business, right? We are being judged for how we look, and the content is just always later. So while you have to worry about nuances, women are just have to worry about, how they're looking. And I mean, I don't know, I'm ranting, and I don't know why I'm ranting.
No, you're not ranting.
But
No,
like
you're
I'm
not. It's
saying
not
that
ranting.
this is a problem in the media space. And what do you say to the women then? Do you say, if you need a market, if you need people, then just play to the game? Or how do we change the game? I'm asking this because I know you understand media and you understand audience and you understand camera. So to every woman who goes before the camera and says, you know what, this is great content, but I'm not looking good, I'm not going to put it out. What do you say to me?
So something that I've learned from women, friends of mine, my sisters, my mother, is that unfortunately, when sexism and patriarchal misogyny is so acute, there is no winning. Because if you look too professional, then you're cold. If you look too fun, then you're the Finnish prime minister and you lose your job because you go to parties, which is insane. If you look too loose and slack, you're not taken seriously as like a real woman. If you're too beautiful, you get criticized for that. If you're too what people don't consider attractive, you get criticized for that. And so just empathically, I just feel it's awful to be in such a no-win situation. Unfortunately, the history of particularly politics, when women are successful, they're often in pantsuits. They're often dressing like men in the Western world. I'll be specific about that.
So when everywhere, so I mean, the dress codes could change.
Yes.
But you are asked to dress a certain type. That type could vary from country to country.
So think about Angela Merkel, for example. She may have wanted to dress that way, but she dressed in what is traditionally considered to be a hyper masculinist, hyper business serious energy. And that was probably the best choice that she could make to be taken seriously in politics, which is incredibly unfortunate. My personal position is, if the game is so rigged and you can play it for the end goal of becoming powerful enough to then subvert it, that's a good idea. So like, if for a while to get to a point of power where you can do whatever you one day do whatever you want because you're so powerful, you need to dress a certain way, look a certain way to get there, then that's not necessarily a bad idea, considering if you don't do that, you may never accumulate that level of power.
Except that's a challenge I face every day, because I'm thinking, like, if you're going to think about an end goal that someday I'm going to reach there and then open up the doors, and maybe what if I die tomorrow in a car accident?
Totally.
And then people just take me for what I've done. And then how do you tell young girls that they can totally be themselves and still aspire to be in politics? So it feels like a dichotomy, almost like, like you're telling young women to like come into politics, but then you're giving them no models.
Yeah.
Not to say that you can be the only role model, but then where are the models, right? Yeah. So everybody is in the race to try and get up there. And then
you have to make like very brave sacrifices, right? So if we think about someone like Greta Thunberg, she's not explicitly a politician, but she occupies a very political role. And she went, screw you, I'm going to be myself. Malala Yousafzai is another great example. But I always worry about recommending people to give the middle finger to such comprehensive power, because I think that there are many, many women who try to take those risks and it doesn't work out for them and they don't get powerful enough through that way. But you're completely right, because the problem with being a trailblazer is that the consequence of your work may only be success for the next generation. And you have to hope that that's going to happen. So yeah, I don't know. And it's funny, like it's like, to a degree, I'm not the right person to give these answers, but I have thought about it and listened to people. And this does seem to be the dichotomy that all women who are trying to achieve, and not just in politics, but in business or any other kind of thing, do face all the time. Athletes, for example. So like, you know, the great Jamaican sprinters who are just phenomenal athletes, but then, and I'm not criticizing her, but Sha'Carri Richardson from the United States is very different, because she wears lashes and beautiful makeup and long nails when she runs. And I'm so glad that she's doing that. But she's been treated awfully for being the pioneer, brave one. And you've just got to kind of hope that if enough women en masse at the same time go, screw the system, we're going to do it our way, that generates enough of a tidal wave of cultural change.
So, but when you're recording your content or doing anything, is gender like an active lens that you take? Do you like filter your content and say, am I, because you're progressive, you're thinking about these issues. So is gender like on the top of your mind, or is it something in the background that you never have to think about unless a controversy comes up, for instance?
So for me, it's equal parts gender, race, and wealth broadly in South Africa.
Right.
Obviously, there are a bunch of other intersectionalities like queerness and homophobia and the rest of that, cultural differences, ethnic differences. But in our hyper-capitalist society, hyper-defined, your fate is defined by race and class and gender, and then probably equal parts physical disability. But there are far fewer people who are physically disabled versus a woman or poor or locked out of a working class cycle. I have to think about all those things. And it's interesting because people often ask me, how do you choose whether to talk about something or not? And I'm very lucky because I've got a show. And so I can choose, sometimes I'm the best person to talk about this, but sometimes the best thing to do is to get an expert who is identity intersection, the right person to speak about this. A great example is right now around the G20, an organization that advocates against gender-based violence in South Africa called Women for Change. They are doing a very loud national protest tomorrow saying the South African government has not taken the gender-based violence crisis in this country seriously. Now, would I be the best person to talk about that? No. But then I invited Women for Change on my show, open lend the platform, ask them questions and let them provide the answers. Because frankly, I don't know the answers.
Yeah. But do you agree with me when I say that in this entire conversation, we need men as allies?
Yes, of course.
Right? And this conversation cannot happen in silos. So yeah, if one could create a platform and say, okay, let me bring the best person to speak and talk about it, that's still men being allies and you creating a platform and opening it to women who want to speak about it. Have you come to India and do you have any Indian story?
Yes. So I went to India for the World University Debating Championships at the end of 2013, start of 2014. I was in Chennai. It was amazing. Then went to Pondicherry after that for a few days to relax after the tournament. It's just fascinating. Like, I can't say India is like this. Nobody can. It's nearly 1.5 billion people. It's an enormous, basically a continent-sized country. But yeah, it was fascinating. I've got a bunch of stories, actually. The first one is we walked out of the hotel and the area of Chennai that we were in, it was like each district focused on one industry. So we walked out and we turned left and we were looking for food. And suddenly we were in the biggest bicycle and rickshaw repair center I have ever seen. We walked for maybe 2 or 3 Ks and we eventually found a restaurant and we ate there. And that night, everybody had stomach pain except the only white guy who was there. And it was really weird. I was like, I don't know how my stomach. Oh, so we had roti and we had chicken curry and so my favorite is Indian food is paneer badami, which is the cashew kind of sauce one.
It's also a little sweet, so not too spicy.
You know, very, very, very few places in South Africa serve paneer badami. They haven't even heard of it before, but I know a place in Johannesburg where I used to go get it once a week, and so I had that. Then afterwards we went to Pondicherry. It was amazing because we took a bus And the long distance Indian buses in that part of the world are wild. Firstly, they're covered in lights for some reason. It's like they're on the way to a festival. Secondly, they are blasting music. And thirdly, what we didn't know was the broad policy in India of women sit separately from men and women sit in pairs with women for safety. And sorry, at least on that bus.
Yes, all right.
At least on that bus company, on that line, on that route, with that policy. And so one of my friends, she had to sit with an Indian woman she never met before, just as that was the way it
Maybe
was.
some of these buses have like seats reserved for women.
Yes.
And so they would say if there were very few women on the bus, then they just sit
Correct.
together.
Correct.
Yes.
Yeah, but it was cool. Pondicherry was beautiful, just like really, really interesting. Also interesting to compare areas of India which are French colonized versus British colonized, because the architecture is very different.
Yes.
The style of the way that people live is very different. It's
Yes.
a hangover of Indian local culture meets whatever colonial power there was. Pondicherry obviously being a former French colony. Yeah.
But as an Indian, when I was coming to Johannesburg in South Africa, I went back to India gave Gandhi to South Africa.
Yes, that's true.
And you gave us a Mahatma.
Yeah,
So in
yeah.
my head, like South Africa, it was just like different, more special. So here in South Africa, do you feel the same about India? Is there like emotional connection? How are people here seeing India? What are you thinking about India? What's your current understanding of what's going on in India? What are you talking about?
I think it depends where in South Africa you are. So obviously there's an enormous Indian population, particularly on the KZN, KwaZulu-Natal coastline, which is on the east of South Africa.
Right.
And that's because a lot of Indians were brought across as indentured laborers and as merchants. Sugar cane plantations and the rest are now formed I think one of the biggest Indian communities outside of India. So if you're on that side of South Africa, India and Indians and the connection to Gandhi is very real and very present and talked about and thought about, and there's Indian culture everywhere. But in other parts of the country, you rarely meet an Indian person, and so there's far less so. What I find interesting about India in relation to South Africa is that I think the vast majority of South Africans don't take seriously what a big deal India is. So I think that we've
Not
got
even
this.
after our cricket team.
Well, we loved that, by the way. We loved that, beating India. It was at Eden Gardens last weekend.
I don't know
Yeah,
enough about cricket to be able to comment, but I'm sure many people in the comment box
It was on
will.
my TV show. It was phenomenal. Yeah, I could talk a lot about that if you want. But yeah, it's interesting because I think that South Africa, as a former British colony, has this unhealthy obsession with America, neo-imperial, kind of like white Western dominated Europe. We've got a natural affinity for the Netherlands and for the UK because of historic colonial movements from those countries coming to South Africa and colonizing it. But I think that South Africa often struggles to take seriously anywhere else. So South Africans don't know enough about Brazil, for example, another superpower democracy BRICS partner of ours that we should care about and know about. South Africa knows a lot about Russia because of the Cold War and because of Russia supporting the armed struggle from a distance and for Russia now in the global politic. But I think South Africans don't think enough nor care enough about India, and I think that should change.
I want to talk a little bit about humor and the power of humor and also dissent. And you do both, right? Like I think political satirists kind of combine this power of humor and satire, and they're dissenting in very meaningful ways, and they're challenging the powers to be. In India currently, we're in a place where dissent is not being allowed. In fact, it's being cracked upon with a very heavy hand.
Right.
And dissenters in all arenas, as individuals, as people who are activists, as comedians, police officers, the government's response is put them behind the chair, right?
See.
Now, I know that you said that in South Africa, thankfully, the culture is people can take joke, etc. But I want you to answer what is it about humor that governments are so afraid of worldwide?
Anybody in power, the biggest threat to their power, particularly their reputation, their sense of pride, their sense of dignity, and their sense of infallibility, is mocking humor. It's the emperor has no clothes concept. It's like, and particularly for more authoritarian governments, so you see this with Donald Trump, he can't take a joke about himself. It's because the greatest danger to authoritarianism and fascism is to make them all a big joke and make them look a bit silly. Because the authoritarian leader, the overpowering dictator tendencied democratic leader, wants to be seen as all powerful because it fuels their own power. If the public is afraid of them and the public thinks that they're going to be in power forever, there's something you can do about it.
Yeah, so as they say that you would rather be feared than be loved.
Of course. Or what many authoritarian governments do is they make up an enemy that you should be afraid of. Say the immigrant, say
Yes, us versus them.
exactly, and then they say we are the only ones powerful enough to save you from that made up danger. And that's why they take themselves so seriously, because they need to be seen to be these great army general types, even though they're not in the army. And what humor can do is it can reduce them to childishness, petty behavior, embarrassment. And that is what is the unique power of humor. So John Stewart has a friend of his who he's had on many times as an Egyptian satirist, and the Egyptian government came for him so hard at the time because he was showing the country how ridiculous these people were, how morally bankrupt they were, and how actually kind of pathetic they were, even as they were powerful. And that's the thing that can really undermine a government, can really undermine their reputation, can really undermine their attempt to get votes.
But then let's talk about the platform. During the launch of Solidarity Alliance as part of the G20, we've been talking a lot about the online intermediaries and how they go about, being neutral in terms of the legal framework. So any kind of problematic behavior. So the government's crushing down dissent on social media platforms, any kind of online hatred coming on women. It could be sexist, it could be on other grounds like caste or religion, any of that. So right now, the online world, which you are avidly, actively using, is just like an open play field. So do you think it should continue to be like that? And do you think, one could argue that there are challenges if you put in too much legal framework on them. I know this could get you in trouble, right?
It won't.
Right. So what's your take on how should we regulate intermediaries, if at all that is?
So South Africa has got the right understanding of freedom of speech and freedom of expression. Absolute freedom of speech and expression is insane. It allows people to cause immense and immeasurable harm to other groups of people. Targeted, aggressive, focused harm. And South Africa's Constitution and Bill of Rights is very clear that all rights are to be enshrined and safeguarded until they seriously harm and denigrate and threaten and endanger others. Absolute freedom of speech and expression, people only like that when the people talking are saying what they think.
Right.
They hate it when they're saying anything else. So I think that you do need a legal framework, or you need some kind of regulation, because immense harm can be done on the internet, far more even than in real life. You can make far more harm on TikTok or Twitter than you can by walking out onto
Because
the
of
street.
anonymity, right?
No, but also because of scope,
Yes.
because of size of audience, plus anonymity.
And the time in which things can spread.
So fast. We're in the most dangerous moment in history because information spreads faster than it ever has. Like in the old days, if you wrote a column in a newspaper and maybe we're on TV, maybe like 100,000 people would see you. Today, I can make a TikTok now and I can get millions of people within an hour around the world. But those people, forget bigotry, they're also not regulated by whether or not they're telling the truth.
Yes.
And that's even worse, in my opinion, because often like the best way to fight bigotry is with facts, because bigotry relies on bullshit. I don't know if I can swear on this, you can bleep it. But like bigotry broadly relies on bullshit to get away with it, because often the facts show that bigotry is silly, and lots of unjustified hatefulness. Well, I think nearly all hatefulness is unjustified, but I'm more worried actually about the internet being captured now, because if you look at the hyper-capitalists who own Meta, Twitter, TikTok, they're not impartial actors. They're not people who are like, what legal framework can I use to treat everybody equally? They're like, no.
How do I find the loopholes?
Don't you dare criticize Elon Musk, or he will deplatform you, humiliate you, ruin you. Don't you dare talk about Gaza, or TikTok will remove you. So we're already moving into a world where, sure, the endless internet is free, but there are public squares where most of the world is going. Your TikToks, your Facebooks, your Instagrams, your Twitters, your YouTubes, and they are owned by private companies who are not thinking about the best interests of humanity. So in a world, I don't think the choice is free internet or regulated internet. I think the internet is being captured. The question is, would we rather have massive businesses decide who gets shut down and who's allowed to speak? Or would we rather have a legal framework created by citizen voting and buy-in? And I think clearly you would rather have the second one.
But I'm not seeing the governments moving in that direction anytime soon.
They're bought off and they're helpless. And the big media conglomerates are already debasing journalism, hollowing out advertising revenues.
So where is this people's movement going to come from? How do we as citizens take the power back in this kind of internet economy? Are you seeing a way?
Well, fortunately, fortunately, traditional conservatives are very unimaginative and uncreative, and broadly, the people fighting against them are more creative and more interesting. So you see minor, incredibly smart ways of protesting already, right? So if you use the word rape on TikTok, the video is not going to go anywhere. But if you say the word grape and everyone knows and you establish what grape means, then you can get around that loophole. There were people talking about Gaza knowing that their stuff would be taken down. And so what they would do is they would do a nail tech kind of video, do your nails, and about 120 seconds in, they'd be like, bang, 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 bang. But the TikTok kind of screening didn't catch that. And then it can gain evolution. The other thing that's really great right now is that everyone is talking about misinformation and disinformation. So people are becoming more media literate just by using the internet because they're being forced to think what's being shown to me, what isn't. If I'm trying to post about this, is it going far or is it not? And the more people who are using the internet, the more they're realizing the silent invisible hands that are
controlling the algorithms
Exactly.
and therefore what they see.
And the more that people do that, the more people will find other ways of communicating. So what's another great, like the greatest super information highway in the world, probably right now, at least in the Western world, is WhatsApp. So if you take it to WhatsApp, and WhatsApp is not regulated in that way because it's a black box, then you can really do what you want. And people are figuring out ways to slip through the cracks in the big public squares.
Yeah, I think those are some incredible examples. But I have to ask you this: is fake information like a real issue in South Africa?
Yes, terrible issue. Terrible.
And a big in India, we recently had one of the top leading news channels. They call themselves the fastest mainstream media channel. Pronounced
Can I just say, that's terrifying. If what you care about is being the fastest, you don't care about the fullness of the story, and you're probably screwing up. You shouldn't show off about that. Anyway,
Right.
sorry, back to you.
and they pronounced a famous Bollywood actor dead when he wasn't. And then, of course, took 48 hours, the fastest, to come and say, oops, sorry.
And the retraction never moves as far as the action. So the vast majority of people would not have seen the retraction.
The damage is already
doesn't
done.
spread that way.
Right.
I hope that Bollywood actor gets an enormous amount of money in a civil claim against them.
I don't think he's going to court, not that I'm aware of, but he did make a video in that, like, he wasn't keeping very well in the battle. He still made a video saying, people,
I'm alive. Yeah.
but fake information is so big that we have like this one organization, all they do, and thank God for them, they check facts even put out by the government
We do too.
on Twitter.
Yeah, you have
Right.
to.
So in India, at least, we are seeing this as like a citizens-led thing. Is that the same here in South Africa?
So journalists more and more are becoming fact checkers because that's the core information is dispelling stories. But what we need is enormous funding towards professional fact checkers. So we've got an organization here called Africa Check that does literally what you have described. And you can send in stories and they'll debunk big stories, and that's useful. But it still doesn't spread as far as the initial disinformation. The reason why South Africa is so, and I actually have spoken about this 4 times at 4 different events in the last 2 weeks, so you got me on the right day. But the reason why South Africa is so vulnerable to misinformation and fake news is twofold. The first one is we've got an education crisis in this country. So people are not being equipped with even the basic understanding of how to judge a framework for what is real and what is
And one
not.
could argue deliberately so.
Absolutely. South African government, you know where I live. But the second thing is that we have 12 official languages. And so all data shows that people like to read the news or learn the news in their home language. Of course you do. It's a matter of facts and reality and truth. But in only 2 of those official languages do we have a strong, vibrant news media scene. Only 2. So in 10 of our official languages spoken at home by 30 million people or more, you only have one authority, which is SABC News. It's our public broadcaster. And if they don't talk about something, there is no developed private media whose reputation is built on getting it right and telling the truth. And so disinformation can spread because there's no reliable journalistic proper practice actors talking the truth. So that makes South Africa particularly vulnerable to nonsense.
But I'm almost screaming, like, think about India.
Even worse.
Where we have like 32 languages, which are, in our constitution, and then several more
Dialects.
So then that leads us to the question, at least in India, there's a question about funding and the big media houses now being controlled by the biggest corporates. And so how are we going to break this chain? Where is the new media? Is it on YouTube? Is that where we can look? Or is there elsewhere. Now, what's happening in India is a lot of people, top journalists who were working with the top media houses that were considered credible, now because these media houses have been taken by the corporates,
Yeah.
have had to turn to YouTube.
Yes, of course.
And now the government is about to bring a law that says you can't do XYZ on YouTube.
Wow.
So forget about the hate speech that women are facing and everybody else is facing. Forget that. Like somebody with that kind of credible history, like if you ask questions on YouTube, we're now going to come for that,
Yeah.
right? So, but apart from YouTube, where is the vision or the horizon opening up for new media?
Yes.
And are there media structures or experiments anywhere around the world where we can look towards with hope and as an example?
Yes. So, as much as we are all sad about the evil bigots and their disinformation and their content creation on massive platforms, the counter to that is the good people can do that too. And so, more and more phenomenal journalists who are seen to be credible, phenomenal content creators or whatever, who are known to be reliable, are just going to your TikToks and your YouTubes. In South Africa, we don't have the same problem that you've described is about to happen in India.
Sure.
But developing massive platforms to the point where people are going to them now and often out competing traditional news media. Now, that's a poison chalice, and I'll tell you why. Traditional news media is more important than the content creators. They go frontline journalists, find out what's actually happening in the world, and the content creators can talk about that stuff. Without the real media,
Money.
totally.
Yeah.
Although now more and more there are ways to make money as an independent individual creator.
No, but how do you send somebody on the front lines of what's happening where, right?
Yes.
As you correctly said, only the mainstream media houses can do it.
And so my position, and it's been done by places like the Washington Post, is you don't, as a major media house, you don't think of the content creators as the enemy. You think of them as future employees. So the Washington Post were like, we've got these great journalists. They know how to write and research, but they don't know how to make good video. We don't want to force them to now be video content creators. That's taking away from their time and their skill set of what they do really well. So we're going to hire content creators as the new wave of storytelling, and they're going to work with our journalists to make stories for us. And so we're not losing to the content creators because people are coming to the Washington Post to see highly skilled content creators who've worked with the journalists to tell these stories.
Yeah, but you have to have the intent of showing the truth, or at least multiple perspectives,
Totally.
without living universal truth.
So that's in the ideal world where the corporate that owns the media house is not cooking the books and tilting the scales. But we have seen many examples around the world of mass-based messaging systems like your Signals and what's the other one? So it's WhatsApp and it's Signal and there's
Telegram.
and Telegram. So Signal and Telegram are encrypted in such a way that you can go on there and you can mass broadcast. You get tens of hundreds of thousands of followers, and the governments can't reach that yet, and hopefully they won't be able to. And I am hopeful that more and more as people distrust traditional media, distrust governments, distrust big corporates and big business interests, more and more apps will be built, and people, the mass kind of citizenry, will go, we go there for the honest truth and the free truth. And then in those places, I hope that the journalists and the good content creators win.
All right. That's some hope there. Okay, so we're going to launch ourselves into a rapid fire.
Okay.
And we're going to see how we do there. So we're like quick responses and then I'll move from question to question.
Okay.
All right. So what do you say to Elon Musk?
What do I say to Elon Musk?
Yeah.
I don't say anything to Elon Musk.
Okay.
I've got no time for him.
What do you say to Mr. Modi, Narendra Modi, the Prime Minister of India?
I wouldn't say anything to him either. Well, okay, he's heard this already. I would say stop making people of religions that are not yours the enemy and destroying their sites of culture and patriotic Indian identity and trying to erase them from the Indian national consciousness.
Okay. Do you want to say something to Mr. Rahul Gandhi, who is a leader of opposition in the Congress party?
Do better than last time.
Okay, we will get that.
It's the right track, but like just do better than last time, because you need to do something incredibly powerful to defeat someone as powerful as Modi is. And to do that, you need to change the imagination in India from who are the enemies, how can we get rid of them, to the government is failing you, the government should do better.
Okay. Everybody who's trying to amplify equal voices and women's voices in the media space, how do we do that?
Prioritize women's voices. So I know this isn't rapid fire anymore. I'm taking too long.
Don't worry.
But there are databases around the world, including in South Africa, where if you need an expert on something, there's a whole database of phenomenal women experts. Just use those. Make an active and conscious choice to center phenomenal women who deserve to be centered, but due to patriarchy and misogyny have not been centered. And frankly, lesser talented, lesser capable men have been getting too much airtime.
Okay. When Dan is not on camera, what is he doing?
Reading the news. No, when I'm not on camera, I'm sitting in bars with friends of mine who are all incredibly smart, talented, artistic, creative, and making them talk to me. I am watching football, which is my religion. Soccer is my religion. I'm running, I'm playing tennis, I am sleeping, and I'm watching extremely good dark comedies.
Okay, what do we say to somebody who says talking will not change the world? You guys stop yapping.
Talking is the only thing that has ever changed the world. Like that's how you build consensus amongst enough people to do anything.
Yes.
I mean, I don't know if you've noticed, but there are no nation states of 1 or 10. The greatest superpowers of any movement have been built through mass collective mobilization. Union movements for rights that we all have, fighting back against authoritarian regimes, fighting back against genocidal behavior, making armies go, oh, we can't actually deal with 1 million people who are angry with us without a mass slaughter, which we won't do. Mass mobilization of invested, involved people is the way to save the world.
Okay. And do you promise to bring India in the next show in some way, which is creative?
I did. I'm going to talk about the G20. And one of the most important things in the G20 this year is the advocacy to properly tax multinationals who have been avoiding tax. A great example is Apple, who through some really dark deeds that are technically still legal, only pays 0.05% tax on their profits. And we need multinationals to be regulated by nation states together so they can't just avoid tax and ultimately pay less tax than you and I pay by like a mile.
But that's not talking about India.
Wait. So one of the key intellectual geniuses of this movement, pioneering this, is an economist called Jayati Ghosh, who I just interviewed, and I will be talking about her.
Yes, she is brilliant.
So I will be talking about her.
Super. And very quickly, what's the one vision that you have for the world? So what's like, if there's one change you want to see while you're alive, what would that be like? Put your biggest, boldest manifestation out there, Dan. This is the time.
Mass redistribution of wealth and resources. So the world already creates more food than all humans could eat, but so many people go hungry. The world already creates more electricity, more water, has the capacity to create more education and healthcare services in the world than any human could have. We could all have enough to live good lives. It is an artificial, unnecessary construction of the world economic system and order that so many people don't have rights, don't have food, don't have access to basic resources for human dignity.
Okay, and I do this in every podcast, which is I hold hands.
Okay.
And then you look into the camera.
Okay.
And yes, and every girl like me who's scared about how she's looking, she can't be on the camera. How are we going to do this? How are people going to judge us? As somebody who has mastered the art of being on camera, what do you tell girls? And we're channeling the energy.
It may not feel like it, but we live in the best moment in history to be a girl or woman. It may not feel like it, but this year is a better year than any before in human history to be a woman. And those advances were gained by powerful, phenomenal women fighting back. So you're already at the best moment in history to be a woman and the most likely moment in history to cause fundamental change, not only for your own life, but for women fighting against patriarchy and misogyny. So back yourself and go do it.
You should fight an election. Brilliant political speech, but I felt it. So thank you so much for making the time.
You are a really good interviewer. I know it's not your main thing, but this was like you did this conversation phenomenally well.
Thank you so much. Then could you say people to like, subscribe, and support Her Path to Power?
Yes.
And if you do it in the way that you do it in your show.
Okay. Hey, welcome to the Dan Corder Show. South Africa is a movie. Welcome to the watch party. I've just had the most phenomenal conversation with somebody representing the broad movement of Her Path to Power. And I'm so inspired and confident that if you get involved, like, subscribe, and support, not only will you learn so much about the incredible women around the world making an enormous difference for themselves and their communities, but also women all around the world, but you'll be inspired, learn skills, and be able to make a greater difference in your own life. So go like and subscribe, bro. It costs you nothing. And you you just get to see
And this-
more of this.
And this is not paid. This is not paid. Just to clarify. All right.
That was not paid.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Her path to power.